September 19, 2019, 4:23 a.m. CCTV cameras capture two figures walking past Tamworth Rugby Club in Staffordshire, England. Keeley Bunker, 20 years old, and beside her, Wesley Streete, her childhood friend since infant school. Keeley is heading home after celebrating her birthday. She's tired, maybe a little drunk from the nightclub, but she feels safe. Her friend Monique had offered her a bed for the night, but Keeley declined. She had a job interview in a few hours. She wanted to sleep in her own bed. Her last words to Monique echo with devastating irony. "I've got Wes. He'll walk me back. It'll be fine." By 9 p.m. that evening, Keeley's uncle will find her body face down in a brook, partially submerged, covered with branches, strangled, raped. Murdered by the man who promised to walk her home safely. The same man who had attacked 3 other women before her. The same man whose phone GPS would place him at the murder scene 7 times that day. The same man who had joined the search party, helping police look for the body he knew was hidden in Wigginton Park. Wesley Streete had known Keeley Bunker since they were children in infant school. They'd grown up together in Tamworth, trusted each other, celebrated birthdays together. On the night Keeley died, she specifically chose to walk home with Wesley because she felt safe with him. But what Keeley didn't know was that Wesley Streete was a serial sexual predator. Since 2015, he had attacked 3 other women, including raping a 20-year-old just 5 months before Keeley's murder. These crimes were unknown to Keeley, unreported to police until after her death. How does a childhood friendship become a death sentence? How does someone assault multiple women without consequence, only to escalate to murder? And how did Wesley think he could get away with it when his own phone was tracking his every movement? Today, we break down the final hours of Keeley Bunker's life, the investigation that exposed a predator hiding in plain sight, and the trial that would lead to a controversial, rough sex defense that shocked the nation and changed British law. This is the story of Keeley Bunker, the woman who trusted the wrong friend on her way home from celebrating her 20th birthday. Keeley Bunker was born on September 6, 1999, in Tamworth, Staffordshire. At 20 years old, she was petite, barely 5 feet tall, with a personality much bigger than her frame. To everyone who knew her, she was tiny but mighty, full of life and energy that filled every room she entered. Her mother, Debbie Watkins, described Keeley as one of the most vibrant, caring, and beautiful souls. She worked as a barmaid while studying to become a teaching assistant. She wanted to work with children, to make a difference in young people's lives the way teachers had made a difference in hers. Keeley was close with her family, especially her uncle Jason Brown, who she'd text regularly and confide in about her life, her dreams, her struggles. She had a wide circle of friends, including Monique Riggin, who she'd known for years and trusted completely. On September 6, 2019, Keeley turned 20 years old. It was a milestone birthday, the transition from teenager to adult, and she wanted to celebrate properly. When her favorite rapper H announced a concert at the O2 Institute in Birmingham on September 18th, Keeley and Monique bought tickets immediately. This wasn't just any concert. This was Keeley's birthday celebration, her chance to let loose after working long hours at the bar, her opportunity to feel young and free and excited about the future. She had a job interview scheduled for September 19th, a step toward her teaching assistant dreams. Life was moving forward. What Keeley didn't know was that 12 days after her 20th birthday, on the night she celebrated with music and friends, she would be dead. Murdered by someone she'd known since childhood, someone she trusted enough to walk home with in the early morning darkness. September 18th, 2019 started as a perfect evening. Keeley and Monique took the train from Tamworth to Birmingham, excited for the H concert at the O2 Institute. This was Keeley's delayed birthday celebration, her chance to see one of her favorite artists perform live. The concert was everything they'd hoped for. The energy, the music, the crowd singing along to every song. Keeley was having the time of her life, dancing with Monique, posting photos to social media, living in the moment without any idea that these would be her final hours of happiness. After the concert ended, Keeley and Monique made their way to New Street Station in Birmingham. That's where they ran into Wesley Streete. He was out in Birmingham as well, and when he saw his childhood friends, He suggested they all go to Snob's nightclub together. Keeley and Monique agreed. Why wouldn't they? Wesley was a friend, someone they'd known for years, someone who seemed harmless and fun. The three of them headed to Snob's, one of Birmingham's popular nightclubs, to continue the celebration. Inside the club, Wesley began drinking heavily. Much more heavily than Keeley or Monique. Witnesses would later describe him consuming 3 drinks for every one the girls had. By the time they left the nightclub at 2:40 a.m. on September 19th, Wesley was noticeably drunk, stumbling and loud. They caught a taxi back to Tamworth. All 3 of them piled into the back seat for the ride home, tired and ready for sleep. The taxi dropped them at Monique's house around 4 a.m. Monique immediately invited Keeley to stay the night. "Just sleep here," she offered. "We can crash, and you'll be safe." It was a generous offer from a good friend who wanted to make sure Keeley got home safely. But Keeley declined. She had that job interview later that morning, just a few hours away. She wanted to sleep in her own bed, wake up in her own home, be properly prepared for the interview that could change her career trajectory. "I've got Wes," Keeley told Monique. "He'll walk me back. It'll be fine." Those would be the last words Monique ever heard Keeley speak. "I've got Wes. It'll be fine." At 4:32 a.m., CCTV cameras captured Keeley and Wesley walking past Tamworth Rugby Club. Keeley's home was less than a mile away. A straight shot down the main road, well lit and direct. The walk should have taken 15 minutes at most. But Wesley didn't walk Keeley straight home. Instead, according to GPS data from his phone, he led her into Wigginton Park. This wasn't on the way to Keeley's house. This was a detour into a dark, isolated park where no one would see what happened next. In that park, Wesley Streete raped Keeley Bunker. Her tiny 4-foot 11-inch frame was no match for his 6-foot height and strength. She fought back as hard as she could. Forensic evidence would later show scratches on her own neck from where she'd tried desperately to prise his hands off during the attack. But Wesley was too strong and too determined. After raping her, he strangled Keeley to death. The medical examiner would later determine she died from compression to the neck, likely a chokehold that cut off her air supply until her brain was deprived of oxygen. Keeley's last moments were terror and betrayal. The friend she'd trusted, the boy she'd known since infant school, was killing her in a dark park while she fought desperately to survive. After Keeley died, Wesley didn't call for help. He didn't feel remorse or panic. Instead, he dragged her small body to a brook running through the park. He positioned her face down in the shallow water and covered her with branches, trying to hide what he'd done. Wesley's phone GPS data shows he remained at the location where Keeley's body was hidden for approximately 1 hour. What was he doing during that time? Cleaning up evidence? Making sure she was truly dead? Waiting to see if anyone had heard or seen anything? Eventually, Wesley left the park and walked home. He stripped off his jacket, heavily stained with Keeley's makeup on both sleeves from the struggle. He dumped it in the park. He left his bank card somewhere between the rugby club and the murder scene. Then he went to bed, sleeping while Keeley lay dead in the brook less than a mile away. September 19th, 2019, dawned bright and clear. Keeley should have been waking up for her job interview, nervous and excited about the opportunity. Instead, she was dead in Wigginton Park, and no one knew yet. When Keeley didn't show up for her interview, her family became concerned. When she didn't answer her phone or respond to messages, concern turned to fear. Keeley was reliable. She always answered her phone. She always let people know where she was. At 5:30 p.m., Keeley's father, Christopher Bunker, reported her missing to Staffordshire police. He gave them the last known information. Keeley had been at a concert the night before, had gone to a nightclub with friends, should have come home in the early morning hours. Police immediately began investigating. They contacted Monique, who told them about Wesley Streete walking Keeley home. Officers tracked down Wesley and brought him in for questioning. Wesley's story was simple and believable. He'd walked Keeley partway home, they'd hugged goodbye at a telephone box near his house, and then they'd parted ways. He assumed she'd made it home safely. He had no idea where she was now. But police had something Wesley didn't know about: GPS data. Modern smartphones track location constantly, creating a digital trail that's nearly impossible to erase. When investigators pulled Wesley's phone records, his story fell apart completely. The GPS data showed Wesley hadn't walked straight home after parting with Keeley. Instead, his phone had entered Wigginton Park, the opposite direction from his house. His phone had remained stationary at one location in the park for approximately an hour, right around the time Keeley should have been getting home. Even more damning, Wesley's phone showed he'd returned to Wigginton Park 7 times throughout September 19th. 7 separate trips to the same location, the last one at 2:25 p.m. Why would someone return to a random spot in a park 7 times in one day unless they were checking on something they'd hidden there? When confronted with this evidence, Wesley's demeanor changed. The helpful friend willing to answer questions became silent. "No comment," he repeated to every question. "No comment." Police knew they were dealing with something far worse than a missing person case. They organized a search of Wigginton Park, calling in volunteers from the community to help look for any sign of Keeley. Wesley Streete joined the search party. He walked through Wigginton Park with police and volunteers, helping look for Keeley Bunker while knowing exactly where her body was hidden. He watched people walk past the brook where he dumped her. He listened to family members calling her name. He acted concerned and helpful while concealing the fact that he was her killer. At approximately 9 p.m. on September 19th, Keeley's uncle Jason Brown was searching near a brook in Wigginton Park. He saw something in the water that made his blood run cold. A body, face down, partially submerged, covered with branches. Jason let out what he would later describe as the most horrendous scream or shout I've ever heard in my life. The sound of a man discovering his beloved niece dead, murdered, hidden like trash in a park. Police immediately secured the scene. They pulled Keeley's small body from the brook and began the grim work of processing a murder scene. Forensic teams worked through the night, documenting evidence, photographing the area, searching for anything that could tell them what happened to Keeley Bunker. What they found would paint a clear picture of rape and murder. Keeley had scratches on her neck from her own fingernails, evidence she'd tried to pull someone's hands off during strangulation. Skin was recovered from under her fingernails, suggesting she'd fought back and scratched her attacker. Most damning of all, Wesley Streete's DNA was found during the post-mortem examination. Not just touch DNA or transfer DNA, but DNA that indicated sexual contact. This immediately elevated the case from murder to rape and murder. Police arrested Wesley Streete and charged him with the rape and murder of Keeley Bunker. The childhood friend, who'd promised to walk her home safely, was now facing life in prison for killing her. As investigators dug deeper into Wesley Streete's background, they made a disturbing discovery. Keeley Bunker wasn't his first victim. She wasn't even his fourth. 3 other women came forward after Keeley's murder, finally finding the courage to report what Wesley had done to them. Their stories revealed a pattern of sexual violence stretching back to at least 2015. The first victim was a teenager, under 16 years old. Wesley had sexually assaulted her when he was just 16 himself. This wasn't youthful experimentation or a mistake. This was a deliberate act of sexual violence against a child. The second victim was another teenager. Wesley had sexually assaulted her as well, using his size and strength to overpower her resistance. Like the first victim, she'd been too frightened and ashamed to report what happened. The third victim was a 20-year-old woman Wesley had met through Snapchat in May 2019, just 4 months before Keeley's murder. He built a rapport with her online, gained her trust, arranged to meet her in person, then he raped her. This victim had been wrestling with whether to report the crime when she heard about Keeley's murder. The news that Wesley had killed someone gave her the strength to come forward. Her rape kit and testimony would become crucial evidence proving Wesley's pattern of sexual violence. Prosecutors now faced a decision. They could try Wesley solely for Keeley's rape and murder, or they could include charges for the other 3 victims to establish his pattern of behavior. They chose the latter, filing charges for 2 counts of rape, 3 counts of sexual assault, and 1 count of sexual activity with a child, in addition to Keeley's rape and murder. Meanwhile, Wesley's defense team was building their strategy. They knew the physical evidence against him was overwhelming. His DNA was inside Keeley's body. His phone GPS placed him at the murder scene. His jacket was covered in her makeup. His lies to police were documented. They couldn't claim Wesley didn't have sex with Keeley. They couldn't claim he wasn't at the park. They needed a different approach, a controversial legal strategy that would shock the courtroom and ultimately change British law. Wesley would claim the sex was consensual, and that Keeley's death was an accident during rough sex. Wesley Streete's trial began in July 2020 at Stafford Crown Court. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, the courtroom proceedings were complicated by social distancing requirements and safety protocols. But the case moved forward because justice for Keeley couldn't wait. The prosecution's case was devastating. Mark Paul, the Crown Prosecution Service prosecutor, presented a clear timeline of events backed by irrefutable evidence. CCTV footage showed Keeley and Wesley entering the park together. GPS data proved Wesley lied about his movements. His phone's return to the murder scene 7 times demonstrated consciousness of guilt. The jacket stained with Keeley's makeup proved physical contact during a struggle. The DNA evidence proved sexual contact. The skin under Keeley's fingernails proved she fought back. But the prosecution didn't stop with Keeley's case. They brought forward the 3 other victims, women who bravely testified about Wesley's previous attacks. These women described a pattern: Wesley using his size and strength to overpower them, Wesley ignoring their resistance, Wesley treating their bodies as objects for his gratification. The 20-year-old woman he'd raped in May 2019 was particularly powerful. She described meeting Wesley through Snapchat, how friendly and normal he seemed, how she'd trusted him. Then she described the rape, the pain, the fear, the trauma that had haunted her for months afterward. Her testimony established that Wesley Streete was capable of rape, that he had committed rape just 4 months before Keeley's murder, that this wasn't an accidental death during consensual sex, but rather the violent act of a serial predator. Then came Wesley's defense. His lawyers presented what's known as the rough sex defense, a controversial legal strategy that claims a death during sexual activity was accidental rather than intentional murder. Wesley took the stand and claimed that he and Keeley had consensual sex in the park. He said Keeley agreed to choking as part of rough sex play. He claimed she died accidentally when the choking went too far and he panicked instead of calling for help. This defense strategy was already controversial in the UK, with critics arguing it allowed killers to blame victims for their own deaths by claiming they consented to dangerous sexual acts. Wesley's use of this defense would become one of the final cases before Parliament banned it. But the prosecution tore Wesley's story apart piece by piece. If the sex was consensual, why did Keeley have skin under her fingernails from fighting back? If her death was accidental, why did Wesley hide her body under branches? If he panicked, why didn't he call for help? Why did he lie to police about being in the park at all? Why did he return to the scene 7 times to check if her body had been discovered? Most damning, why did Wesley join the search party and pretend to look for Keeley while knowing she was dead in the brook? The jury heard from forensic experts who explained that Keeley's injuries were consistent with forceful strangulation, not consensual rough sex. They heard from Keeley's friends who said she'd never expressed interest in rough sexual activities. They heard from Monique, who tearfully recounted Keeley's last words: "I've got Wes, it'll be fine." After hearing all the evidence, the jury retired to deliberate. They spent approximately 8 hours carefully reviewing the testimony, the physical evidence, and the law. On August 5, 2020, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of rape, guilty of murder, guilty on all additional charges related to the 3 other victims. Wesley Streete showed no visible emotion as the verdicts were read. The man who'd strangled his childhood friend, who'd raped 3 other women, who'd hidden a body and joined the search party, sat stone-faced as his life sentence was confirmed. 2 days later, on August 7, 2020, Mr. Justice Jeremy Baker sentenced Wesley Streete to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years before parole eligibility. With credit for time served, Wesley would serve at least 29 years and 46 days before he could even apply for parole. The judge described Wesley as truly evil and noted that Keeley had trusted him to walk her home safely. Unfortunately, the judge said, nothing could have been further from the truth. Keeley Bunker's murder devastated her family and community. Her mother, Debbie Watkins, spoke about being robbed of my precious and beautiful daughter. Her uncle, Jason Brown, who'd found her body, struggled with the trauma of that discovery and the knowledge that he'd been one of the last family members to speak with Keeley. Monique Riggin carried the weight of survivor's guilt. If only she'd insisted Keeley stay at her house. If only she'd been more forceful about not letting Keeley walk home. If only she'd known what Wesley was capable of. The if-onlys haunted her, even though none of Keeley's death was her fault. But Keeley's case had an impact far beyond her family's grief. Her murder became a catalyst for legal change in the United Kingdom. In December 2020, just months after Wesley's conviction, Parliament passed legislation restricting the use of the rough sex defense in murder trials. The new law, informally called Keeley's Law by some advocates, made it much harder for defendants to claim accidental death during consensual rough sex. Lawmakers specifically cited cases like Keeley's, where violent men used the rough sex defense to try to escape responsibility for murder. The law now requires defendants claiming this defense to provide corroborating evidence of the victim's consent to dangerous sexual practices, rather than simply making claims the victim can't refute. Keeley's case also sparked important conversations about unreported sexual assault. 3 women had been attacked by Wesley before Keeley's murder, but fear and shame kept them silent. If any of them had reported Wesley's crimes earlier, he might have been in prison on September 19, 2019. Keeley might still be alive. Victim advocates used Keeley's story to emphasize the importance of reporting sexual assault and supporting survivors who come forward. They noted that serial predators like Wesley rely on victims staying silent. Every unreported assault gives them freedom to attack again. Wesley Streete remains in prison, where he'll stay until at least 2049. He'll be 50 years old before he's even eligible for parole, and there's no guarantee he'll ever be released. Life sentences in the UK typically mean exactly that, especially for killers who show no remorse. The 3 other women Wesley attacked have tried to rebuild their lives, carrying the trauma of what he did to them, but finding strength in knowing they helped put him away forever. Their courage to testify ensured Wesley was convicted not just for Keeley's murder, but for his entire pattern of sexual violence. Tamworth, once a quiet town where childhood friends trusted each other and young women felt safe walking home, learned a hard lesson about hidden danger. The community erected memorials to Keeley, planted trees in her memory, and committed to teaching young people about recognizing predatory behavior. Keeley Bunker should be 25 years old now. She should have finished her training as a teaching assistant. She should be working with children, making a difference in young lives the way she dreamed about. She should be celebrating birthdays with Monique, visiting her Uncle Jason, making her mother proud. Instead, she's frozen forever at 20 years old, remembered not for how she lived, but for how she died. Murdered by a childhood friend on the night she celebrated her birthday. Betrayed by someone she trusted enough to walk home with at 4 a.m. Wesley Streete destroyed more than just Keeley's life. He destroyed her family's sense of safety, her friends' ability to trust, her community's innocence. He proved that monsters don't always look like strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they look like the boy you sat next to in infant school. But Keeley's legacy isn't just tragedy. It's also change. Legal reform that makes it harder for killers to blame their victims. Awareness that helps other women recognize dangerous patterns. Courage from survivors who found strength in Keeley's story to report their own assaults. Keeley Bunker was vibrant, caring, beautiful. She was a daughter, a niece, a friend. She was someone who wanted to make the world better by teaching children. She deserved to live out that dream. Wesley Streete will spend the rest of his life behind bars, finally stopped from hurting anyone else. That's not justice for Keeley, because nothing can bring her back, but it's accountability. It's protection for the women he would have attacked if Keeley's murder hadn't exposed him. The last words Keeley spoke to her friend were, "I've got Wes. It'll be fine." Those words haunt everyone who loved her, but maybe they can also serve as a warning. Trust your instincts. Watch for warning signs. And remember that feeling safe with someone doesn't guarantee you actually are safe. Keeley Bunker's life mattered. Her death wasn't meaningless, and her story will continue to protect other women for years to come. If you made it this far, if Keeley's story touched you the way it should, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I cover cases like this, where trust was shattered, where families had to fight for the truth, where justice almost didn't come at all. Subscribe, because these stories need to be told. Thank you for watching, and thank you for caring enough to make it to the end. I'll see you in the next